So in this tutorial, we're going to go over some of the more advanced functionality of Digital Anarchy's Primatte. Now, Primatte is a filter for Photoshop and Photoshop compatible applications that allows you to do chroma key masking, which is basically the removal of a single color background, allowing you to create masks around difficult to mask objects like hair, transparent fabrics, translucent objects, glass, plastic, what have you. Basically just making the masking process a lot easier. It does assume that you have a solid color background, and because of this, we can design an algorithm that can easily deal with that situation. We don't have to worry about all sorts of other things like a general purpose masking tool does. We have all sorts of objects in the background, colors, just noise in general. By assuming that we have a solid color, it makes it much easier for both Primatte and for you. So let's jump into the filter, Digital Anarchy, Primatte. And this loads up the Primatte interface. And by default, it remembers the settings that you last had. So in this case, if we've already done this to another image that has a similar background, quite often all you have to do is reapply the filter and it will take care of it for you. But in this case, we're going to reset it and start from scratch. So the first step in any Primatte session is to select your key color. This is the color that Primatte is going to try and remove from the entire image. And by default, this is not what you want, of course. You want to remove it only from the background, not from the entire image. And so we need to tell Primatte what is the background and what is the foreground. And the easiest way to do that is to go into our mask mode and select our clean background tool. And you'll notice in the original image, we have some darker shades over here, some lighter shades over here. And so when we clicked in the darker area, it didn't make all of the lighter shades transparent as well. It mostly just covered the darker shades. And if you look at the mask, you can see some noise in here. You can zoom in on that. See some noise in there, and that's just because it didn't get the entire range of green. So we need to expand that range a little bit, and the easiest way to do that is using the clean background tool, and just click and drag in that area. And that makes everything black. So now we have a good black portion of the matte going around our subject. And now we need to do the opposite and tell Primatte what areas are completely in the foreground, what areas are completely opaque. And we just grab the clean foreground tool and start clicking and dragging inside of our subject. And you may need to do it a few times just to make sure you get every last bit of gray. And you don't want to click outside of the subject. And we'll do that. It looks like we've got pretty much everything. So let's take a look at our composite mode. And you can see that we've got a pretty good mask. We've got a little bit of a green tinge in the edges of the hair, but we can deal with that with our color correction tools. And it looks pretty good otherwise. And at this point, we may want to feather our edge a little bit. So we'll shrink the matte in a little bit, feather it a bit. It's going to take care of some of our edge problems. And now we can just grab our spill control tools and start clicking and dragging. So here's our spill minus. Let's first deal with the area down here. See that we've got some green going on there. And you just click and drag. And Primatte automatically color corrects it for you. And the nice thing is, it'll take care of those shades of green pretty much anywhere in the image. So if we come back to the top here, you can see that it's already done a pretty good job of getting rid of that. The only problem that we still have, really, is the fact that the area up here seems to be a little bit darker than the rest of his hair. And the reason for that is that it really has to do with how light is coming through his hair. Obviously, this is along the top. This is a little bit more affected as far as the tone goes by the dark green background than the rest of him. And so what we need to do up here is simply make this area a little bit more transparent. And we can do that with the Make Transparency tools. So now we'll come in here with our Make Transparency tools and start clicking in this area. this area as well. A little bit too much. And we're just going to make this all a little bit more faded out, a little bit more feathered. It's going to allow the background to show through a little bit better. Zoom out and see where we're at. So you can see that we've got a pretty good mask on a very complex subject. This hair normally would be really difficult to do if you were trying to do it by hand. And so now we have a good mask and we're ready to go back into Photoshop. So let's click apply and jump back into Photoshop. So one thing to check on when you've done anything involving transparency is to make sure that portions of the image didn't become transparent that you don't want to have any transparency. And the easiest way of doing that is actually to come up to Select, Load Selection, load the Layer 6 Transparency, click OK. This looks fine, but let's save this out into a channel and see what we get. So we'll just say New Channel. Okay. Now let's go take a look at our channel. And you'll see that we've got a bunch of gray values up here. And what that indicates is that we've got some semi-transparent pixels going on where there shouldn't be. And one of the easiest ways of dealing with that is actually to make use of the history brush. So let's jump back up to our RGB channel. We'll deselect all this. And we'll grab our history brush and come back to click on Open, which is the original file. Let's set this up a bit to say feathered 65. And we can start painting in his original hair up here. And this may look very subtle, but it's actually, when you actually print these things out, it makes quite a bit of difference because you end up with bits of the blue showing through, or yellow, or whatever color you end up putting over there. So it's really important that you kind of get everything to be completely opaque that needs to be opaque. And so now if we redo that trick that we just did, where we load the layer transparency and save it out as an alpha channel, and we can just replace that channel, click OK, jump back to it, and you can see that we've gotten most of it. There's a little bit left over here that we need to deal with, but overall we're doing okay. And so let's just jump back, do a little bit more over here, and we're good to go. So that's using the history brush to paint back in areas that might be affected by the transparency tools. And quite often you can let the transparency tools deal with an edge color, or deal with the pixels around the edge. It'll mess something up on the inside, but then you can just go in with a history brush and paint that stuff back in. So that's a very powerful tool. And something else to keep in mind about using Primatte is that you should always preview the image on a background that's similar to the one that you're going to end up on. It's helpful if you can get the client or person you're taking a portrait of or what have you to kind of sign off on a background before you start doing the keying. That way you can know whether it's a dark background, a light background, a yellow background, a blue background. And this will make it easier when you're in Primatte to see any flaws in the Primatte results. For example, let's change the background layer. And that's, of course, the great thing about Primatte is you end up with the result on its own layer with transparency, so you can move it around and do what you will to it. We'll undo that. And you can also drop in different backgrounds. And these are all backgrounds created with Digital Anarchy's Backdrop Designer. And so we've got this nice glowing background. And it turns out our client's kind of a macho guy, and he doesn't like yellow, so he wants something more blue and dark and cave-like. So let's come in here and apply hue and saturation. And the background's nice enough, but he doesn't like the colors, so let's come in here and start messing around with the colors. We'll desaturate it a bit. Adjust the lightness down. Okay. So that's looking good. But all of a sudden we realize that the edge of his hair doesn't look quite as good as we thought it did. There's a little bit of just kind of noise that's showing up, and this is going to happen almost any time you use digital photos. Digital photos just have an amazing amount of noise in them. And, there's good degraining tools out there. Visual Infinity makes an excellent product called Grain Surgery, which is excellent for getting rid of grain. But the end result in Primatte is that you end up with just kind of some garbage here. And there are various ways to deal with this. You could go in and redo the image. But one quick and easy way, which will work some of the time, is just to grab the eraser tool, set a really large value that's feathered, and just come in here and, start kind of cleaning things up a little bit. Getting rid of some of that noisy stuff. And this can go a long way to cleaning up an image that otherwise you might have to pull back into Primatte and redo. Doesn't take a lot of work, and you can just kind of do some really quick touch-up with the eraser tool. And when we zoom out, still a little bit soft, but it looks a little bit better than it did with all the kind of noisy, grungy stuff on there. So those are some of the tips and tricks for pulling the most out of Primatte. Primatte many times will work flawlessly right off the bat, but there are occasions when it won't, and it's good to know that you can use the other Photoshop tools to go in there and correct any blemishes that might come up. So hopefully that was informative, and look for our other tutorials on Primatte.